Hey FFR listeners, this is engineer Rob Para letting you know that today's episode sounds a little zoomier than usual because it was recorded on Zoom. Just use your imagination and pretend you're on the call and you're chatting about this classic film with the crew. Enjoy the episode.
Hey FemFreak radio heads, Pandemic Summer 2.0 has wound down. Now that it's fall, it's time for you to snuggle up with the feminist pop culture analysis you can only get from your good friends at Feminist Frequency Radio. And you know what would make everything even more cozy? Cuddling up with the community of listeners and supporters over on Patreon. Subscribers get early access to new episodes, bonus content, merch discounts, listener polls, and the occasional surprise treat. But when you sign up on Patreon, you won't just be supporting our feminist media analysis. You'll also be giving real, tangible support to our incredible games and online harassment hotline, which is our free, confidential, text message-based emotional support hotline. Head on over to patreon.com/femfreak to sign up now.
I wanted a killer from a world filled with killers, and they chose you. Like, that's not lost upon me that, of course, they chose him. One of the most kill-tastic countries. We had already started the death machine around the world. I had to look up how many times we had invaded Korea, essentially. I didn't realize that our invasion of Korea started in the 1800s.
Hello and welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Ebony Adams, and Anita is out tripping the life fantastic somewhere in the world, I don't know where. So I am in the driver's seat for today's episode. Strap in, everybody. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing The Manchurian Candidate, the 1962 psychological thriller from John Frankenheimer. It's going to get weird, I hope. Stay tuned. All right, I want to welcome two special guests today because you know what? Anita wasn't going to leave me out to talk about The Manchurian Candidate. That episode will be 17 hours long. I want to welcome Dr. Kishonna Gray and Paul Spencer. How are y'all doing?
Wonderful. Thank you for having us and hosting us, Ebony. Appreciate you.
Of course. Now, Kishonna, you are currently the Associate Professor in Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies at the University of Kentucky. Can you tell us, like, the elevator summation of the work you do?
Oh, absolutely. I love this question. It's my favorite question because I love talking about myself and my work.
Yes.
But I explore, people's experiences in online gaming spaces. So in the chats, in the communities, in the lobbies, online, in the Twitter spaces and social media spaces, if people are talking about games, I'm there observing and watching and interviewing and analyzing and talking a lot of shit about the institutions that are continue to fail minoritized people in gaming spaces. Elevator
Come
pitch.
on now. Come on now. How long have you been doing this work?
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see. I did grad school from like 2007. I finished in 2011. So I've been doing it for a hot minute now.
Okay.
I think 10 years since I got my PhD. So woo. Wow.
I love it.
What's this year? 2021, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dang. Yeah. It's been a minute. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I want to get into this with you. We probably will do it in the bonus, but our grad school years did not overlap at all. I'm 97 years old. So I finished my PhD in 2006. And since then have tried my hardest to forget everything that I learned, studied, struggled with, whatever. We'll talk about that later.
Yes, please let us do that. I would love to know that because that's actually a good thing. If you can do that, you're a lot healthier in life.
This is the only reason I've made it this far.
Absolutely.
Now, Paul Spencer, writer, bon vivant, raconteur, trouble, outlaw, redheaded stepchild. Tell us a little bit about the writing that you do. Now, I know you. We've known each other for years and years and years. And so I know you as a screenwriter, as a novelist. But tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, I mean, I work on, with my scripts, to be honest, when I write by myself, I tend to write thrillers, there's a bag of money, there's 18 people trying to get it, everyone's double crossing each other kind of thing. But I've written with a lot of other people. And that's always a very different kind of experience. And, but with that, I've written comedies, dramas, other kinds of stories. I've written a novel, one novel for sure, and I'm working on a second. The first was a coming of age story that really didn't work.
Uh-huh.
And the second, though, is kind of a strange political thriller. I have a tendency to be drawn towards stories that intersect our personal lives with our politics and our ideologies and how they create motivation.
I love
because sometimes your politics is motivated, say, by your family, and sometimes your motivation is related to your situation. But it's, there's always these complicated. I think often we minimize the complexity of motivation.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I try to focus on in my writing.
I'm so excited for this conversation today. Kishonna, like with your background in, communication and rhetorics and different kinds of rhetoric, Paul, with, your cinephile background, your writing and thrillers, like, oh my God, I might just shut up and let y'all talk. So let's get into it. As I have mentioned to the audience before, I have been waiting to discuss the Manchurian Candidate for years now, basically since the podcast started. It took Anita literally leaving the country for her to be like, okay, you can finally do this. So listen, we polled the audience twice. Once I was like, okay, the theme is bad mothers. Manchurian Candidate was on that list. People didn't select it. Finally, we're like psychological political thrillers. People came through for me. So we're going to get to talk about this absolutely wild piece of cinema, all about monstrous mothers, Cold War sleeper agents, the wages of masculinity. We're going to get into it.
What did they choose on Bad Mothers that wasn't this movie?
Carrie, which is a solid choice.
Okay, that's solid. But
exactly. I wasn't, trying to like game the system or anything, but I have to admit I was disappointed. So
I'm sorry, but I actually, even though Carrie was a bad mother, but Angela Lansbury is the worst.
Listen, we are going to get into it.
Oh my God. Real quick.
For those of you who have not seen the film, or for those of you who have never heard of it, the phrase "a Manchurian Candidate," sort of in pop culture, I'm just going to give you the quick Wikipedia summary. So, Manchurian Candidate is based on a novel by Richard Condon. It centers on a Korean War veteran, Raymond Shaw, who's part of a prominent political family. He is brainwashed by communists after his army platoon is captured. Once he returns to civilian life in the United States, he becomes an unwitting assassin in an international communist conspiracy, the members of which include like the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union. And their aim is to assassinate a presidential nominee, which is going to lead then to the overthrow of the U.S. government. So that's kind of the background of the story. There's so much that we can talk about. Kishonna, Paul and I have had like 17 phone calls about this. And he's like, I just want to make sure we talk about this. I just want to make sure we talk about this. And I'm like, save it for the podcast.
Don't burn the podcast, right?
Love it. Obviously, because I put this on the Monstrous Mothers poll, definitely want to talk about Angela Lansbury, but not just mothers, but like the fear of the feminine at large, Oh,
absolutely.
I mentioned I wanted to talk about like double consciousness, double speak. We want to talk about like the genre conventions of political thrillers, about nation building. There's really too much for us to get at in 35 minutes. So I'm going to throw to you, Kishonna. When you watched the movie, had you seen it before we asked you to come on and talk about this?
I saw the one with Denzel.
Okay.
So I had a little bit of a context for it, right? But I think this one hits so much more and so much better than the one with Denzel, right? So whenever I was first asked about it, I don't spend too much time like doing like the background and seeing what it's about. But whenever I was watching, I was like, this woman looks familiar to me. I was like, who is she? I was like, Angela Lansbury. That name is so familiar to me. Why do I know this? And so I called my grandma. I was like,
your grandma was like Jessica Fletcher.
Come on, Murder, She Wrote.
Yes. And I think I watched it through like a different lens because in my notes, whenever I was watching it, I think the first thing, of course, you have to do is, if anybody that studies like film and media stuff, Monstrous Mother is the first thing that you're thinking about. Right. But yes, I did that. But I also thought about this dynamic woman commanding the screen in the 1960s and thinking about what happened, what was the background to even have such a woman in such a prominent role? Like for me, I was like, well, the 60s, Sinatra. And I'm like, I felt like she was very prominent, but I was like, maybe she's prominent because she's the villain. So I guess I had so many more questions about the background and the casting and the directors and all that stuff. And to really try to figure out, okay, she was a badass like in Murder, She Wrote, but I'm like, I didn't know she was like a badass like back in the day too. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Angela Lansbury, like we've got a little bit of like the Graduate situation, right? Because she's playing a woman, she's playing the mother of
5 years older than him.
if that, right? You know?
Right.
So you have something very interesting going on with that kind of casting. But yeah, there's a way in which, you know, Angela Lansbury and Janet Leigh, whose role is smaller, really sort of command attention in this movie over and above the work that the male actors are doing and the male characters are doing, such that you are left thinking about them and about like the sheer power, manipulative power that both of them possess, and the utter incapability of any of the men around them to resist what they want to do.
Yeah, well, the men are falling apart, and the men are having nervous breakdowns. They're having
all of them.
All of them.
They're all emotionally out of control. Like, get your shit together, man. What is this?
Yeah, and they're having all these breakdowns. Even like Bennett Marco's former friend. Is it Melvin who you see him wake up from the guys from the same nightmare?
Yeah.
And so all these men are having these psychological disturbances and
Right.
falling apart, and the women are the ones who are really in control of the situation.
So much control, holding things down.
And so one of the things I was telling Ebony before is and we may be jumping ahead of ourselves at the moment, but one of the things for the movie is supposedly about the Cold War and the dialectic between communism and capitalism, and the communists in USA. But there's this other Cold War going on, which I think because the movie is about the subconscious, obviously, and about the brainwashing and all that. But the movie, really gets into this the real fear that I think the moviegoer is left with, and they may not even realize it at the time when it came out, is feminine power.
Yes.
And that if you show weakness, and when you're having weakness, these women are going to take control, and they're really manipulating you in this. Even though you're in this the movie came out in 1962. But it's obviously this kind of like, Mad Men world of, men are supposedly, the breadwinners and the rulers, and the women are the wives, but the wives are the ones who are manipulating everything.
Yeah. And I mean, it's very telling that one of the women that we're talking about is played by Janet Leigh, right? And Psycho comes out only 2 years before this, which is another monstrous mother, fear of the feminine.
Right. And so, and I think there's this other element of the movie that the real one. I think this movie is so layered, it's hard to get a handle on because there's so many things going on. And there's so many things that the movie's about. But one of them is the idea that the real fear is matriarchal control.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because, I'm always big about putting stuff into like historical context, because media is really like a reflection of the times and what's happening.
Yes.
And so I guess it's not lost on me that, okay, the movie, it's set in the 60s. Like we aren't too long from being out from World War II. And then remember how, women, Rosie the Riveter kind of thing, women were in the workforce. We needed women to pick up the slack. There were campaigns to make sure the women were, hey, get y'all asses out here and work. All the men's gone to war. Y'all got to come out here. We need y'all. And then the backlash when the men came back. We don't talk about that, about how a lot of women were like, I don't want to go back to the kitchen. I don't want to go back to the home. What is this? And so, you always wonder, what are those private moments, public and private moments, but really that private moments of like, women were like, well, I liked working. I want to be out there. Why can't we? And then men were like, oh my gosh, these bitches is actually good at their job. They might compete with us. We got to get them back. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I guess it's not lost on me of like the timing of this. And even the release of, there was like a really of that feminist text. Oh gosh, I gotta look. I put it in my notes. Oh, the feminine mystique, and that was like a Betty Friedan. That was like a critique of like middle class. First off, we also need to put it in context. Women of color, poor women,
I was going to say
always working.
Right.
So these are not our conversations. These are not the conversations our grandmothers and our aunties like we're having, right? But really that the feminine mystique was really like a push to like middle class women to like be like, hey, look at these poor women. They've got agency. They're already fighting for better wages and better working conditions. And y'all just sitting in there letting the men tell y'all what to do and stuff. So I guess I was just I'm always fascinated by the conversations that's happening and how it's like reflective. But I'm thinking about, what you just said, Paul, but you're absolutely right. The conversations about these women that are out of control, and we got to get them under control, because look, they're going to turn into communists.
Right.
Well, and it also aligns feminine power with diametrically opposed to American capitalism.
Yes.
Which ties into what you were saying with, like, say, unions, or with working class, or with, it ties, it kind of, in a strange way, it subconsciously ties feminine power to, communism, socialism, unionism, which, I mean, we're still living with today.
Right.
A woman starts talking about, equal pay, all of a sudden everyone's acting like, oh my God, it's socialism. We're gonna turn into, the Republic of North Korea, or some bullshit. And excuse me, I don't know. Can we cuss on this?
Yes. What if I said no? What if it was too late? What if I had to bleep your ass, Paul?
Sorry. So anyway, but I think it subconsciously does that, and it's that's there's so many things about this movie that are layered and disturbing. And that's one of them is I think it leaves the audience when they walk out. They think it's a movie about political assassination, but it's not.
Right.
At all.
And they go home and they start thinking about it, and it's deeply upsetting.
It is. And I mean, I have to say, one of the things that we talked about in our conversation, Paul, is that for me, as compelling as Angela Lansbury is as a villain, and she is delicious as a villain in this film. Yeah. She is not the most upsetting to me. Rosie, played by Janet Leigh, is more upsetting to me. It's worth unpacking why that is, but from the very moment we meet her, when Bennett is on the train having his breakdown, and goes into the connecting area between train cars, and then Rosie sort of like forces a conversation upon him and forces him to maintain communication with him, and then pushes through a relationship. Her manipulation of Bennett is much more open, and it is more disturbing because the end result of it is ostensibly a much more benign end, which is, home, family, marriage. It is the sort of thing that, the middle class white American person is supposed to want, right? But the way in which he goes about achieving it is so unsettling to me. And yet, as an audience,
was she a spy?
That's the thing. I think the film very cleverly plants that notion in your head, because she keeps the way that she talks to him when she says, like, I live at 34 Maplewood Street, whatever, right?
Like, to me, it sounded like that. Yeah. That was like code of like
exactly. Yes. It's more conditioning. And so then the understanding that no, she's not a spy, or at least unrevealed, right? Like the realization that no, she's just a woman. This is how women operate. This is how they trap men. This is how they condition them to behave that we want them to behave. And it's throughout. So I found her like the most upsetting.
I did too. Like Eldorado 5609. Like, I remember the number and everything.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, is this, going to be the twist, that ultimately she was behind this, or that, there's an even larger conspiracy behind this, let's be honest, kind of bumbling one between like these cartoonish Russian and Chinese agents, in the amphitheater. Like, come on.
Right. But,
that whole thing is comedy. Go ahead.
One of the things that, you got to go back to with that train scene, though, is all the men in the unit were brainwashed.
Right.
All of them.
Yeah.
So Raymond Shaw may have been the assassin, so to speak, the assassin of that the movie's about, but all the men in the unit were brainwashed.
Right.
And I think that train scene, the reason that train scene is so freaking weird is because, and I think I told you something, but I think that part of what they're giving us a clue of is that Janet Leigh, Rosie, is offering phrases that are triggers to see if Frank Sinatra or Bennett Marco is still conditioned. And that's why that initial conversation is so weird, because she keeps tossing out the dialogue doesn't make any sense, for a moment. And she keeps tossing out these funny phrases like, whatever, Maryland's pretty. He's like, well, we're in Delaware or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, Ohio's great. It's like, she's tossing out these phrases that they don't make sense in any normal way of conversing, which tells me she's tossing out trigger phrases to see if Sinatra is still conditioned.
Right.
Make sure he hadn't been deprogrammed yet.
Yes. Right. And when I mean, and obviously the idea of a woman who, after she meets a guy for 30 minutes, decides to bail him out of jail, dump her fiance and move in with him or whatever. Right. I mean, it's like, obviously she's lying.
Right.
You know, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, none of it rings true.
Yeah. Now, I have not read the book, you know, upon which this is based. So I have no idea. Is there a reveal that actually Rosie is, you know?
I haven't read the book either. And Richard,
you know, so any listeners who've read it, feel free to hit me up on Twitter and be like, okay, y'all, this is, you know, actually what Richard Condon was doing and John Frankenheimer was, you know, you missed it, whatever. I'm happy to take my lumps. But yeah, I found that so interesting. And I mean, when we talk about like the fear of the feminine and the monstrous, and I do mean that, you know, in precisely the connotation you would expect, because it's not just Angela Lansbury. I'm blanking on Eleanor Island, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not just Rosie. It's also that group of older women in the gardening society, right? Like it is telling that this group of older women, yeah, you know, are the stand-in for this manipulation and that
for the communists and Soviet agents.
Exactly. You know, and so, you know, going back to what you were saying, Paul, about like the aligning of the feminine as being more naturally tending towards the collective, you know, the sort of communist ideals, as if that is a sort of natural affinity that needs to be guarded against, because the feminine, the female, will naturally attempt to manipulate towards those ends.
Well, can I say two things around about that?
Mm-hmm.
One is, and I told you the other day, I did a little research, and like, this is, you know, someone obviously can double check this, but like the women of the Hydrangea Society, it's interesting that Rose and Eleanor have names that are also flowers, which are linked to hydrangeas. So, I mean,
that whole conversation was interesting that they were saying there. Go ahead.
Linked to flowers, and so there's a name symbolism going on there.
Right.
Weren't they talking about one of the flowers is like an invasive species? Because that whole scene was messing me up because I didn't know what was happening. But wasn't it like one of those flowers was like an invasive species, like from Japan? And
the hydrangeas. It's like hydrangeas from Japan, but they can't get the color blue, and you know, it's like all this stuff. And but then we get Rosie and Eleanor, whose names are names of flowers, and so I think there's a linguistic link, you know, between those two characters and the Hydrangea Society. Yeah. And which is, of course, the communist Soviet, you know, really it's a double thing. And everything in the movie has all these doubles and all that. And, you know, the other thing I was going to mention is, and as someone who studies rhetoric, I know you said you watched the movie, you know, to watch it again, one of the things to really look at is, and you may have noticed this, but how many times in the movie characters contradict things they've already said? Mm-hmm. Constantly. It's a weird thing they do where they so one is like the easiest one is when they always talk about how Raymond Shaw is the kindest, warmest, you know, blah blah blah, but then obviously he's a complete freak, and you know, at one point Marco even says, you know, he's not just hard to like, he's impossible to like. And it has to do with like other kind of moments where, like, you know, Marco says he's with the Office of Intelligence, but then he says it might as well be the Office of Stupidity.
Right.
But there's all these linguistic moments where, like Raymond at one point says, you know, somebody asks him, how does he feel? He says, I feel like I'm Captain Idiot of Amazing Comics or something. And it's like, but that's not, you know, that it's a contradiction. Mm-hmm. You know, when Marco says he never understood the idea of more or less. You know, and there's but it's not just that. There's all these moments where these contradictory, you know, they're going to dress up Raymond as a priest to kill the nominee when, you know, obviously a priest shouldn't murder people. Mm-hmm. Eleanor fights communism even though she's a communist. You know, anyway, the whole movie contradicts itself.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, almost everything everyone says, or everything everyone says they are, contradicts themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because a movie about capitalism and communism and the Cold War, the movie itself is a dialectic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a dialectic, though, internally, because and I think it's saying something about the nature of when you create a world where everything is broken out into either enemy or, you know, enemy of the state. It creates this weird dialectic where, you know, it's impossible to maintain. And I think that's
right.
I think that's part of why the men are breaking apart.
Is that also, I also looked at a lot of it, and let me know if I'm not coming through okay. But I looked at a lot of it as like a critique of the American empire. Like I didn't know how, if there was, because that's how I read a lot of it as, you know, critiques of masculinity, critiques of the American war machine. You know, I mean, it's now, you know, at the time, you know, it was Korea, Cold War, communism, critique of gender roles in the United States. And I even, you know, think about even the folks that they claimed to be communists were some of the most gentle folks, you know, donating to the ACLU,
totally
you know? Yeah. And then there was a quote. Oh my gosh, I had to write this quote down. Think of when the mother made the comment about, you know, the process of, you know, becoming a spy, selling out, you know, and she had to sell her son's soul or whatever to do it. She made the comment, "I wanted a killer from a world filled with killers, and they chose you." Like, that's not lost upon me that, of course, they chose him. One of the most kill-tastic countries, you know, that have, you know, we have a high murder rate. You know, we had already started the death machine around the world, you know, by that time. You know, this was like I had to look up how many times we had, you know, invaded Korea, essentially. I didn't realize that our invasion of Korea started in the 1800s. Like the first time that we were there, you know, doing the colonizing thing, you know, it was the 1800s, and I had no idea. So I think her comment to me is truly a reflection of, you know, settler colonialism, you know, imperialism, and, you know, and I think, and of course, whenever they're trying to think about who are the best killers in the world, of course our son's picked, because he's an American, American born and bred.
Kishonna, like, yes, to everything you were saying. And it is rich that the film and the book upon which it is based, you know, suggest, at least on the surface level, that Americans have to fear incursion from the outside when this is a project that we have perfected based upon our teachers, our European teachers, you know, but the idea that, you know, that we are, you know, a nation of innocents who need to be protected against the machinations of these, you know, older and wilier societies. And I think, you know, just going back real quick to the idea of like masculine and feminine duality as set up in the world of the film, it is important that we understand the way in which, you know, both Russians in the Soviet Union and at the time and Asiatic peoples were feminized in the Western imagination, right? And how they were aligned there. And so again, just, you know, further solidifying like what sorts of peoples cannot be trusted, you know, because of their inherent natures. Paul, I think I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Yes.
Well, I was just making another comment though about the idea of the fact that her son becomes a killer, like Kenosha was doing, would also what that plays into though is it goes back, I think, to what one of the subconscious themes of the movie is about the matriarchy, which is even though on one hand it's about the Cold War and this dialectic of the Cold War, it really is about the nature of the family. And that a powerful matriarch has this incestuous relationship with her son.
Oh yeah, what kind of kiss was that in that one scene too?
It's much more obvious in the book, which I've read. I mean, I haven't read the book, but I've read about it. But there is a incestuous relationship in the book that's made very clear. I haven't read the book, but it's very clear. And both movies actually touch upon it, but it taps into, I think, this idea that the feminine power subverts the family, unit.
Yep. Right. Yep.
So
unnatural. It's unnatural for this woman.
Yes. And so the fact that she's unnatural and she does unnatural things, like there's a quote in the movie where she talks to her husband when her husband and Raymond are fighting, and she says, "My boys."
Yeah. Yes.
And I know that that's kind of an expression that maybe some mothers would say, like, oh, in a gentle way or in a kidding way, but they doing something with this. Yes, there's something where she says that, where she calls them both my boys, which implies she views her son one way, but also she views her husband as someone who is really someone else to control.
Right.
Which she does.
Yes.
And so there's this kind of like, it's a loaded phrase in that movie. And,
it absolutely is.
Yeah.
And so it's also tapping into this idea that the family unit is, being disturbed by this kind of
structure. By that matriarchal structure.
Right. And by women's like sexual power and agency, right? Because remember, there is another woman in the film. There's another woman in the film, Jocelyn, who is, Raymond's long lost love that he was forced to leave, right?
The 1950s girlfriend.
Yeah, she's presented in a much more idealized fashion. But when you contrast her with both Rosie and with Eleanor, she's much more childlike. She's much more solicitous and nurturing. So we see that scene where she comes upon Raymond when they first meet, and she is presented as the sort of woman who, A, can be led, which is more appropriate.
Right.
Oh my gosh,
but someone who it is appropriate to desire. In the way that Rosie and Eleanor are not appropriate objects of desire. And her family, it should be noted, the mother is entirely absent. It's her and her father.
Yes. And Raymond kills them both.
Ooh, snap.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even think about it like that. I mean, but you're absolutely, I don't know. I wasn't that pressed about their dynamic, and I should have been, but I think that that's like really significant. And like really my mind is blown. Was the writers, who was the writer? Can anybody give me some context for the person who wrote this?
Well, the novelist was Richard Condon, who also wrote, by the way, Prizzi's Honor, a movie with Jack Nicholson and Angelica Houston. But he wrote a lot of weird political books, and he was a very strange writer. Very interesting writer.
You said Richard Kinder. What's his name?
Richard Condon.
Condon.
Spell it.
Condon. Yeah.
Okay.
But the screenplay was adapted. So
George Axelrod, who has, did things like 7-Year Itch, Breakfast at Tiffany's. So, I mean, just like.
Not bad.
Yeah, exactly. You got some powerhouses here putting this film together. So, I mean, as weird as this film is, and I cannot express to the listeners enough, if you have not seen it, this movie is way more weird than you would expect
it's a wild ride
it to be. It is not the straightforward political thriller that you would expect it to be. Every time it sort of zigs one way, it zigs another way. It is distancing, it's alienating at every level. Even the casting, I think, is meant to be, off-putting in a way. We talked about Angela Lansbury being only a few years older than the actor who plays her son, Lawrence Harvey. But also Lawrence Harvey has got that like mid-century, mid-Atlantic accent thing going on where you're like, where the fuck is this dude supposed to be from? Because he is not from he's not from New York, Like this is clearly a British dude, Like it is as if we are watching some sort of play acting going on,
That may have been kind of almost planned because the movie.
Yeah, I think so.
It's about and like I talked about, it's about doubling. Everything's a double. Everything is a double of each other. And a contradiction of each other. And so, it's a very troubling movie because it's so unsettling on almost every scene. And, you got to give credit to Sinatra for making a movie like this in 1962. I mean, like, Sinatra.
Say more. I don't know much outside of the Rat Pack for Sinatra.
Right. I mean, here's a guy who's a Rat Pack. He's the most popular singer in the world. And he's going to go make this movie that is this strange.
He owes somebody a favor. He owes somebody a favor.
Exactly, And, one of the things I was going to mention that ties into the idea of also maybe Bennett Marco being controlled by Janet Leigh is another very bizarre scene in the movie where he's talking about his reading habits. And he's whipping out all these books, like reading this, and they're crazy titles. It's all these very, which tells me like, but Bennett Marco in the movie does not strike me as intellectual. He does not strike me as a character who's going to be a reader.
Yeah.
Okay. He's not presented that. And yet, we get to his house and, he's talking about all these books he's reading and they're bizarre. I mean, they're very, very, it's a very weird, eclectic group of books.
Yeah.
That to me is another sign that he is being triggered. That he's being controlled, that they're giving him titles or references. It's just another one of those. Not enough people, I think, talk about this with Janet Leigh, but I mean, it's another weird moment where it's like, it doesn't make sense. And they, there's an element of it that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think that also ties into the relationship with Janet Leigh, of how everything about her and him is off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think that, when we talk about the nature of the Manchurian Candidate, I think Bennett Marco is also maybe the next Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah, I mean, well, you mentioned like everyone in that platoon was brainwashed, right?
Everyone was brainwashed.
Right. So, we would assume that there would be fail safes and backups spent in, right? Like you wouldn't put all your eggs in this one irritating, arrogant basket. You would absolutely have, someone else back up. And also there are probably other duties that these tools are going to be, used to affect, or, jobs that they're required to do.
Did the movie talk about any of that? Go into the background of like the other members of the platoon? No, I remember the black dude. I remember, he had the nightmare. And then did I miss something?
No, he was really the only other member of the platoon other than Raymond Shaw that they really, brought in.
But I think it's a question we're supposed to ask, right? Like, okay, is it possible that these other men were brainwashed purely to support the story that Raymond Shaw is this war hero, to put Raymond Shaw in a position to execute this presidential nominee? Or is there a chance that the conspiracy, or that, this was simply one tool that they are going to use to destabilize American democracy, but, having men, heads of households, captains of industry, whatever, men in position of power, who have been conditioned by us, is going to unseat American society purely by a function of the way that they move through culture. It isn't necessarily going to take the assassination of a presidential candidate for this. Like, I think the film, does suggest that, we should not leave the theater or get up off our couch having watched it convinced that the danger has passed, that it has been eliminated.
In fact, the danger is worse because of the feminine threat and the threat of the unknown,
Right.
Kishonna, you mentioned, and Paul, I think you mentioned too, Melvin, the character of Melvin, who is the black dude from the platoon. And so, the first time I watched this movie, I noted his relatively seamless integration into that platoon, as well as the black psychiatrist who's only in a couple of scenes.
See a Thurgood Marshall looking brother in there. I was like, yes.
I know. Listen, that hair was smooth.
It was smooth. He was smooth with it.
And I was like, okay, there's something interesting going on here too. I mean, we want to emphasize nothing just happens when you put a narrative together, whether you're making choices consciously or unconsciously, but particularly so when we're talking about media like film and TV. When it comes to casting, there are very deliberate choices being made. And so, yes, it absolutely means something that you have a black psychiatrist here, who is going to be, the entry into understanding the double consciousness of these men who have been deployed. And that we see Melvin, as a black soldier who's also undergone that situation. And so, I'm watching this and I'm thinking okay, there's no way 1962, this one black dude is better received in this platoon full of white dudes, than someone like Raymond Shaw. Where's the tension there? But it is important for the myth making in the movie that we are presented with this kind of utopian cultural homogeneity, right?
Listen,
the communists are trying to break apart.
Listen. Okay, let's go back to the garden scene. White lady garden society, right? Yeah. There's a black man on that stage during that time. I was like, something is very off. Even before they had shifted gears to let us know, it was Russians and the Chinese was in this space, right? Even before that, I knew. So I was like, okay, is the movie just going to act like that they are not in the political space in which they're operating the 60s? I'm like, but you're operating in the political space, but then you just going to act like black folks are just seamlessly here. But what was just so fascinating with that, I was like, oh, okay. I see the story you're telling. They said, okay, we've got the blacks under control, but it's this outside threat. Maybe women are the bigger threat. Maybe the Russians are. I don't know, but they really just allowed black men to just exist in this space equals. I'm like, what is happening here?
I'll toss out one historical thing that maybe the movie was trying to tap into, which is Harry Truman integrated the military.
Yeah,
and that would have been in 46, 47. There may have been a little bit of nod to that.
Because Korea happened when? Give me the dates again for the
Korean War was like 51 to 53.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the truce was in 53.
Gotcha.
And so the movie takes place in 62. So it's,
but they're still putting us in the 50s. I have to remember the movie setting is like in the 50s.
51, 52, so in there. But so there would have been integrated units.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, in fact, I think that, the fact that integration would have happened so recently.
Yes.
Compared to the timeline of the movie, makes it even more likely that there would have been racial tensions,
That's true.
In that platoon, right? And in the halls of power. Like, I just, it seems to me it's a deliberate omission to suggest that the tension in that unit came, and it seemed kind of class-based, right? That it's Raymond Shaw and his sort of upper class, entitlement that is the problem for the more working class men, more masculine men of the unit versus this one lone black soldier. But you reminded me, Kishonna, of that, that garden scene. There's a black woman in that group too. And I'm like, if there's any group that I don't believe is, just whining and dining each other, happy-go-lucky, kissing and hugging, it is a group of older white women, older privileged white women in the Northeast in a garden society. There is no way that black woman would have been part of that group.
There's a great discussion about how that scene was changed from the book. Because the book had and again, this is only from second sources. I did not read the book.
Sure.
But the book does a very racial element to that scene where they have white women serving black women.
What?
And it's almost like a double. It goes back to the doubling of everything in the scene. And when they made the movie, they felt that it would be too they felt it'd be too shocking and controversial to have it be that sort of I don't even know what the word is.
In all of this movie's over the top grandness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can't have white
a hydrangea society.
Right.
Dream imagery.
We killing presidents.
Yes. We're killing the president.
The Russians we got the Pavlov Institute of Russia drugging our soldiers.
Right. But we're not.
But we can't have these white folks serving these black folks.
Yes. And and so they decided to switch that scene up because they felt that it would not either get by the censors or get by the public, or they just tweaked it. And so there is a whole thing about that in the book about how that scene did a flip on the racial dynamics of that moment.
Okay, I got to read this book now because I haven't been able to.
Because I love more.
Yes, I'm gonna send you the Cliff Notes versions. I'm gonna send you like page numbers and be like, okay, you got to read this passage.
Please.
Okay. Yo, we have to move on to the Freq Outs. We're gonna resume the discussion in the bonus. So for those of you who are Fem Freak Patreon supporters, you're gonna get to hear us talk more in the bonus. But my mind has been blown, and I'm gonna have trouble putting it back together. I'm gonna take a few seconds. I'm gonna try and get myself back into a position where I can host things.
I didn't even get to my party line comment.
We're gonna get to it in the bonus, so you gotta subscribe, folks. That's right. So we're gonna be right back with some Freq Outs. Hey there, podcast family. While you're enjoying the show today, why not head on over to Patreon and sign up to be part of the crew that makes the magic happen? That's right. When you become a subscriber, you offer us the help we need to keep making the show. So moonwalk on over to patreon.com/femfreak and sign up today. And now, back to the show. What's your Freq Out? Okay, now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, infuriating us, really just tickling our internal ivories. So Paul, I know you have a freak out, and you said that your freak out was tangentially related, maybe too. So I'm gonna let you go first.
Ebony, I may have talked to you about this before.
Mm-hmm.
But a book came out last year called Chaos.
Yeah.
By Tom O'Neill. And the subtitle is Chaos. And the subtitle is Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s.
Come on now.
It will blow your mind. And I do not say that lightly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this book will shock you about what he discovers in revisiting not only Manson, but a bunch of stuff around Manson. And it is whatever you think you know about that story and about that historical event, it'll change. The reason I bring it up, though, is, and I'm not going to go into the whole subplot, I mean, the whole narrative of the book, but anyway, he ends up proving what MK Ultra was about. And MK Ultra, for those of you who don't know, was a CIA operation in the United States, which is, of course, illegal, but was a CIA operation it was a mixture of, some people say it was about torture in the sense of trying to figure out how to get people to confess or reveal things that they were trying to hide. But really, it was also about, and I'm not even making this up, creating assassins and creating people to do things that they didn't even know they were doing through hypnosis, drugs, and suggestion. It was an unbelievably horrific experiment on the American public.
Absolutely.
And he proves it. And he proves it in a way that no one else has proved. And because he found I love to use this word, tranche of letters from the former head of the UCLA psychiatry department to his handler at the CIA, talking about the things that he was able to accomplish. And that's just, part of the book. But the whole hypnosis, suggestion, creating assassins, creating people to do things that they didn't even know they were doing, directly relates to Manchurian Candidate. It's what the whole story's about.
Yeah.
And real story. Absolutely it was.
And it is. And it
wasn't the other. And that's what I hate about a lot of these movies where we always made it seem like, oh, these Russians are doing this. Oh, the communists. We doing it. Go ahead, Paul. My bad.
No. Yeah, exactly. Oh, those crazy Russians. Look at what they're doing. It's like we're the ones doing it.
Right.
So anyway, I would suggest Chaos by Tom O'Neill. It is a brilliant book. It is heavily researched. And I've read a bunch of the reviews about it. And what's funny is so many of the reviews of this book pretend like he doesn't blow the lid off some of this stuff. And he really is getting kind of they're not treating this book like it should be treated. It's really amazing.
Of course not. When has truth ever enraged? I mean, this country. I'm just thinking about all the truths of all the things that this country has done. Like, I don't know what will. COINTELPRO.
Right. And he gets into that too. That's another part of the book too. COINTELPRO. Yes.
I think one of the discussions that was never, at least in my corner, I hate when people do this, when they say oh, why aren't people talking about this? And then it turns out, oh, it's just the people on your Twitter feed, dumbass, that aren't talking. Okay. But it seems to me that there was not nearly enough attention paid from the beginning of this pandemic. And I'm gonna make it clear. I am waxed and vaxxed. I believe in science, okay? But taking seriously the hesitation that some communities felt at trusting the government and trusting the medical establishment. There are real reasons why certain groups of people have known that they have been lied to, they have been led astray,
straight up poisoned, tricked,
their bodies used in the service of white supremacy and capitalism. And so it is not surprising that we were not able to make inroads, initially anyway, with certain communities. Now, as I said, I'm vaxxed, I believe in the science, but I'm saying there was not enough, because to have that conversation would have required spending more time talking about things, not just Henrietta Lacks and what they did with herself.
Absolutely. And beyond Tuskegee, Tuskegee was not even the example to use. Like, we got so many others.
Right. So, I mean,
fertility, sterilization,
exactly. I'm gonna post a link to the book that Paul is talking about, and a link to a couple of other things along these lines, because it's very easy to dismiss this kind of stuff. It's just like, fringe conspiracy theory stuff.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, you go into all of it with your third eye open, with your critical, faculties engaged. But the fact is, there are some things that we all need to be aware of as citizens of this country, things that have been done in our name. And, if you haven't heard of MK Ultra, like, it's going to blow your mind. It will blow your mind.
Blow your mind. Whole mind. Oh, mind.
Now, Paul, you said you had 2 freak outs, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah. Okay, so there's that one. The other one is an older book. I just want to mention it because whenever I get a chance to promote this book, I will.
If it's Don DeLillo, I'm going to beat your ass.
It's called Down by the River.
Okay.
And it's by Charles Bowden. And it is a story about, well, it's initially about a family and a DEA agent who has his younger brother killed in a carjacking. But it turns into this very detailed, researched book about how the cartels basically exploded in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in Mexico. It is the best. I feel it will be the best book you will ever read about the drug trade and the cartels. It is absolutely fascinating. It will blow your mind on what this guy finds out. It is disturbing, and it will lead you to believe that, I hate to say, I hate to be hopeless about certain problems.
Sure.
But,
Pause.
It's hard to imagine how Central America and Mexico are ever going to get out of this situation they're in with crime and the cartels. And, it is a brilliant book, though, and
how we're directly implicated in all that.
All of it.
All the Shah's men. I think all the Shah's men. When I learned the history of our involvement of basically the decimation of the Middle East, even before anybody called the Middle East the Middle. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that was another book that was really like just eye opening and shocking. I'm like, oh my gosh! So all the Shah's men.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, it's a good one. One of those chilling ones, like, oh my gosh, we did this. We did this. Yeah.
Good for us. Good for us. Pat on the back.
When it comes to destabilizing other regimes, no one does it better. We're not new to this shit, exactly. We have perfected it. All right, Kishonna, what is your freak out?
My freak out doesn't even compare to what's been said here. But I think I'm thinking about my Twitter thread has been freaking out these past couple days, and I didn't even know what was happening. But apparently somebody has suggested that people in the academy shouldn't be asking for money when they're doing speaking engagements and doing different kinds of events. People are saying that we should just accept this as a part of like the free labor system.
What the hell?
I know. I'm like, where they do that at? Like, where they do this free labor shit at? I mean, not me. So, and then of course, then people, really clearly outline that I believe this, it's a cis heterosexual white male talking from a lot of privilege and not understanding what all these things, structural inequalities and oppressions and how, think about, we said double conscious, all that kind of stuff. They're not even thinking about what that means, because I mean, in childcare, being a woman, like there was a woman that had a really powerful thread, and she was like, I have to be paid if you want me to attend because I have nobody to keep my children. So I don't have extra money for childcare. Like, so.
And also, like, even if I am so wealthy, Jeff Bezos asked me for pocket change. If you think that my work is of value enough to speak to your audience, then it is worth paying me. And listen, I understand I'm a program manager and my day job, I work for Women in Film. We are a nonprofit, so you do ask people when they can, to come speak, be on panels, whatever. And sometimes you don't have a lot of money, but that is so much different than Harvard with their $1 billion endowment, not wanting to pay their, grad students, their adjuncts, their speakers. And let's be clear, people have no trouble paying the Jordan Petersons of the world when they want to get them to come speak.
But I learned that, Ebony.
But when Dr. Kishonna Gray is on the bill, suddenly they don't want to come up off that check.
Come on.
Come on.
Won't let it happen to me ever again.
Again. It's almost like they don't believe in the free market.
Right?
Okay.
Right. I'm like, I got my market rate right now. It's like,
right. I mean, wow, weird. Some like older white dudes suddenly all of a sudden don't believe in the free market and think that people of color ought to work for free.
All of a sudden. All of a sudden.
Wow. Well, going back to the old days, listen, we ought to be glad, you have a job that pays you a check. Why do I got to add to it? But it's galling when the lack of awareness of how much goes into preparing, taking the time to prepare remarks, if you're doing a keynote address or whether you're part of a panel, taking your time out from your job, from your family, and then to not be offered anything, not, airfare, hotel, not, and some of these people will nickel and dime you to death. So they'll give you some little, basic stipend, but then you don't even get free tickets to the event, that they're
Oh my gosh.
It is insane to me. And again, we all know this, right? Exposure doesn't pay anybody's rent. So just having me on a bill somewhere.
It's not doing that. Ain't doing that on his rent.
That doesn't sell none of my books. So is there a particular Twitter thread you want to link people to? A conversation? Send us the link. We'll put it in the show notes so that people can check that out and get informed. But yeah.
Will do.
Okay, I don't have a freak out this week. Y'all know I watch the same thing week on week, which is what? European crime dramas. So I got nothing new to say to y'all. I've said it all either here on the podcast or on Twitter. Follow me at Ebony Aster if you care what I think, and I know you don't. But if you want to submit a freak out, submit it at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Kishonna and Paul, if people want to find you online, where should they go? And you know what, Kishonna, I'm asking this question to you because Paul is, talk about undercover brother. That dude is not online anywhere you can find. So I'm not even going to ask him.
Listen to his freak outs. I see why. He's like, I know. Y'all ain't going to find me.
Listen, y'all, we are recording this in Zoom. Kishonna and I both have our cameras on. Paul going to try and play like his camera doesn't work. Whatever. I think that the substance of this episode will let you know that Paul is like, listen, I don't want to
ain't gonna activate me.
Don't use my name. Don't drag people to me. But Kishonna, where can people find you online?
Yes, Twitter. I hang out on Twitter at, Kishonna Gray, KISHONNAGRAY. You can find me there. All the social media, you can just search my name. You'll find me. Yeah. I'm friendly. You can talk to me.
She is friendly and so smart.
Hey.
Okay. Paul, is there anything you want to shout out? People, I took it away from you. I know you're not on social media, but is there anything?
I mean, not really. I mean, I got a Facebook page. I mean, I got my email, but I mean, it's not, I'm not really set up yet to be totally,
to be a public figure?
Public figure. It'll happen soon, but not quite yet.
I will say this.
I mean, I already am kind of a public figure in my own way, but that's a different story.
You know what? Those headshots they post in the paper of recent arrests doesn't count.
Or maybe it does. Maybe it is.
I will say this. Paul is someone, if you ever have the opportunity to meet him in person and listen to him talk about The Shining, it will change your life. So, because y'all don't know him, if you would like to send questions to me that I can send to Paul, and then Paul can just answer those questions. He will, and you'll regret asking those questions when he starts blowing up your email inbox.
I love it so much.
It's so good. Okay, next week, Anita is going to be back. We're going to be getting into the Eternals. Can't wait. Y'all know I love a big budget, shoot 'em up, superheroes, people in tights, people in costume. Love it.
Well, that's weird because I'm wearing tights and I'm in costume right now.
Boy, if you don't shut
up.
Love it. Our show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Our artwork is by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Right.